Welcome to Stories That Heal, where every story shows us the power of human connection. In today's video, a high school principal confronts Barron Trump about his MAGA hat, but what follows is nothing short of extraordinary. Watch as Barron's calm words and heartfelt actions turn skepticism into standing ovations, teaching his peers, and all of us, a lesson in unity. This is one story you don't want to miss. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the quiet anticipation of a new school day. At Lincoln Preparatory Academy, the gymnasium buzzed with the usual hum of pre-assembly chatter. Students filled the bleachers, their voices blending into an orchestra of laughter, murmurs, and the occasional shout. Among the crowd was Barron Trump, his tall frame moving with a quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. At 17, Barron exuded a poise that often seemed beyond his years. He wore a neatly pressed navy blazer and khakis, but what drew the most attention was perched on his head, a bright red MAGA hat. The hat was impossible to miss, its bold lettering a striking contrast against the orderly appearance of Barron's uniform. It didn't scream for attention, yet it radiated significance, provoking subtle glances and whispered remarks from the students around him. Barron walked steadily to his seat, his expression calm, his posture unwavering. He wasn't flaunting the hat, but he wasn't hiding it either. For him, it wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of something deeply personal. As students continued to file in, Principal Daniels stood near the stage, scanning the crowd with a practiced eye. A veteran educator with 3 decades of experience, Daniels prided himself on fostering a neutral and inclusive environment in his school. His gaze settled on Barron's hat, and a flicker of concern crossed his face. The principal had dealt with his share of controversies over the years: dress code violations, heated political debates, and everything in between. He knew the power of symbols and the divisions they could spark. Deciding to address the matter before it escalated, he made his way through the crowd, his steps measured but purposeful. The chatter began to quiet as students noticed the principal weaving through the bleachers. When he reached Barron, Principal Daniels spoke in a low, controlled voice, his tone firm but not unkind. "Barron," he said, his words almost swallowed by the ambient noise. "Could I have a word with you?" Barron turned, meeting the principal's gaze with steady eyes. "Of course, sir," he replied, his voice calm and respectful. Daniels gestured toward a quieter spot near the gymnasium wall. The two moved away from the crowd, but their interaction didn't go unnoticed. A few nearby students nudged each other, their whispers quickly spreading. By the time the principal spoke again, a small wave of silence was rippling outward, curiosity growing among the seated audience. "I think it would be best if you removed the hat during the assembly," Daniels began, his voice even. "We try to maintain a neutral environment here, and I'm concerned it might be seen as controversial or disruptive." Barron tilted his head slightly, considering the request. His expression remained composed, his response measured. "With respect, sir," he said, his voice steady, "this hat means something important to me. Would you allow me to explain why?" The principal blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected calmness of Barron's reply. He had anticipated either immediate compliance or defiance, not a reasoned request for dialogue. Daniels shifted his weight, glancing around at the growing number of students now watching the interaction unfold. The chatter had died down almost entirely, replaced by a collective focus on the tall young man and the principal. "Barron," Daniels said, his tone softening slightly, "I appreciate your politeness, but this isn't about explaining. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable." "I understand that, sir," Barron replied, his voice clear but not confrontational. "And that's exactly why I'd like to share my perspective. Maybe it could help us all feel more comfortable with our differences." The gymnasium grew even quieter. Hundreds of eyes were now fixed on the pair, the air charged with a mix of tension and intrigue. Barron's calm demeanor was disarming, his words deliberate and thoughtful. He didn't seem like a teenager caught in a moment of rebellion. He seemed like someone intent on making the moment meaningful. Principal Daniels glanced around, sensing the room's energy shifting. The veteran educator was torn. On one hand, he didn't want to set a precedent for turning assemblies into debates. On the other, he couldn't deny the sincerity in Barron's eyes, a sincerity that seemed to resonate with the students, who were now watching in rapt attention. After a long pause, which felt like an eternity, but was merely seconds, Daniels sighed and gave a slow nod. "Very well," he said, gesturing toward the podium at the front of the gym. "You have 5 minutes." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Barron stepped toward the front of the room. His footsteps echoed in the now silent gymnasium, each step deliberate, his tall frame cutting a striking figure against the backdrop of the school's colors. Principal Daniels followed a few steps behind, still unsure if he'd made the right decision, but unable to shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. Barron reached the podium and turned to face the assembly. Hundreds of students, teachers, and administrators sat before him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. He placed his hands lightly on the edge of the podium, pausing for a moment to gather his thoughts. The red MAGA hat remained on his head, its presence a silent but powerful statement. From the back of the gym, a student whispered, "What's he going to say?" Another replied, "This is going to be a political rant for sure." But Barron stood firm, unaffected by the undercurrent of murmurs. His calm confidence seemed to quiet even the most doubtful voices. Principal Daniels crossed his arms, leaning against the wall as he watched. He had no idea what Barron was about to say, but he couldn't deny the weight of the moment. The gymnasium felt different now, the air thick with anticipation. Daniels knew that whatever came next would define this assembly, and possibly much more. As Barron took a deep breath, the gymnasium fell into complete silence. The usual noise of rustling papers and shuffling feet had vanished, replaced by an almost palpable sense of expectation. He lifted his gaze, scanning the sea of faces before him, and began to speak. "Thank you, Principal Daniels, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts," Barron began, his voice clear and steady. "I know many of you are wondering why I chose to wear this hat today, especially when it could be seen as controversial. But sometimes it's the smallest things that lead to the most important conversations." From the very first sentence, Barron had captured the room's attention. What started as a confrontation was now unfolding into something far more complex. Every student in the gymnasium leaned in, eager to hear what he would say next, their preconceptions and assumptions hanging in the balance. Barron stood at the podium, his composure steady as he scanned the faces before him. Some students sat with arms crossed, skepticism etched on their features, while others leaned forward, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The gymnasium, moments earlier filled with chatter, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to speak again. "This hat," Barron began, lightly touching the brim of the red MAGA cap, "means different things to different people. For some, it's a political statement. For others, it's a reminder of what they stand against. But to me, it's something deeply personal, a symbol of lessons I've learned about perseverance, respect, and standing up for what I believe in." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. In the back, a faint whisper carried, "Here comes the political speech." Barron paused, letting the words hang in the air before responding with a faint, knowing smile. "This isn't about politics," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about something we all face every day, the courage to be ourselves, even when it's uncomfortable, and the strength to stand up for what we believe in while still respecting those who see things differently." The quiet hum of the gym's ventilation system was the only sound as Barron continued. His tone was measured, but there was an undeniable passion behind his words, a sincerity that began to cut through the walls of doubt and assumption surrounding him. "When I was younger," he said, his voice softening, "people often assumed they knew everything about me because of my last name. They thought they knew what I believed, who I was, and what I stood for. Some made jokes, others passed judgment. But my parents taught me something invaluable during those times. How you respond to challenges defines you more than the challenges themselves. The room grew stiller, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. Even those who had initially dismissed him found themselves drawn in, captivated by his authenticity. This hat isn't about pushing an agenda, Barron continued, his voice growing steadier with each word. It's a reminder of the lessons my father taught me about perseverance and standing firm in your convictions, and of what my mother showed me about grace under pressure. It's a symbol of my journey, but it's also an invitation to a conversation, a chance to find understanding even in disagreement. At the edge of the gym, Principal Daniels stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But inwardly, he felt a shift, a quiet admiration for the young man standing before the school, speaking with a maturity and insight that belied his age. "Last month," Barron said, his gaze sweeping the room, "we discussed the First Amendment in our American history class, not just freedom of speech, but the deeper idea behind it, that a society grows stronger when we allow different viewpoints to coexist, when we choose dialogue over division." A few teachers exchanged glances, impressed by how their classroom discussions had resonated with the young man. Barron pressed on, his voice unwavering. "But here's what I've come to believe is even more important. True strength isn't about wearing a hat or making others see things our way. It's about being secure enough to listen to those who disagree with us, to find common ground, even when it feels impossible." Barron paused, reaching up to touch the brim of his MAGA hat. The gym was utterly silent now, every student and teacher hanging on his next words. "When Principal Daniels asked me to remove this hat," he said, "his concern wasn't about suppressing my views. He was thinking about our school community, about creating a space where everyone feels welcome. And you know what? That's exactly what I want too." A few students shifted in their seats, visibly moved by the sincerity in his voice. In the front row, Sarah Chen, one of the most vocal opponents of anything politically charged, found herself nodding slightly, her arms no longer crossed. "I could stand here and tell you about the times I've been judged unfairly, about the assumptions people make when they see this hat or hear my name," Barron continued. "But instead, I want to share something my sister once told me. In any confrontation, the person who remains calm is the one who can truly lead." His voice softened, becoming more personal. "Last summer, I attended a youth leadership conference where nobody knew my name. I made friends, worked on projects, and shared ideas. But when people found out who I was, some of those same friends treated me differently. I could have gotten defensive or angry, but I didn't. Instead, I remembered what my family taught me. Actions speak louder than words, and character reveals itself in how you treat others, especially those who disagree with you." Barron gestured toward the crowd, his hand sweeping across the diverse group of students. "Look around this room," he said. "We come from different backgrounds, beliefs, and experiences. That's not our weakness. It's our strength. Every day, we study together, laugh together, and solve problems together. That's what makes our school special." The tension in the gymnasium began to shift into something else, a sense of connection, a collective realization of the truth in Barron's words. "So, when Principal Daniels asked me to remove this hat," Barron continued, "I didn't see it as an attack on my beliefs. I saw it as an opportunity to show that symbols and labels don't define us. Our actions do. Our character does. The way we treat each other does." Barron paused, his hand resting on the brim of his hat. The room was so quiet that the sound of a single pencil dropping could have echoed like a drumbeat. "And that," Barron said, his voice carrying a quiet strength, "is why I'm choosing to do this." With deliberate slowness, Barron reached up and removed his MAGA hat. A collective gasp rippled through the gymnasium, followed by an expectant silence. Holding the hat carefully in his hands, he looked at it with a mixture of reverence and resolve. "This hat means something to me," he said, his voice steady. But what means more is the lesson behind it, that we can stand firm in our beliefs while still reaching out to others, that we can be proud of who we are while respecting who others are. Reaching into his blazer pocket, Barron pulled out a navy and gold school cap, its colors gleaming under the gymnasium lights. He placed it on his head, the gesture simple yet profound. In this school, he said, we're not divided by our differences. We're united by something stronger, our shared experiences, our dreams, and our dedication to learning and growing together. From somewhere in the back of the gym, a single clap broke the silence. Then another, and another. Within moments, the applause swelled into a thunderous ovation, echoing off the gymnasium walls. Barron stood at the podium, his expression calm but grateful, as students began to rise to their feet, clapping and cheering. Principal Daniels, standing near the edge of the stage, felt a lump rise in his throat. In all his years as an educator, he had never seen anything like this. Barron Trump had taken a moment of potential division and transformed it into an unforgettable lesson in leadership, understanding, and unity. As the applause thundered through the gymnasium, Barron Trump stood quietly at the podium, his calm demeanor unchanged despite the overwhelming response from his peers. The sight of students rising from their seats, clapping with genuine respect, wasn't something he had expected. Yet, he wasn't basking in the moment. His mind was already on what needed to happen next. Principal Daniels, standing near the edge of the stage, watched with an expression of quiet wonder. Over the years, he had seen countless assemblies, many of them powerful in their own way, but none had managed to capture the heart of the school quite like this one. Barron's actions hadn't just diffused a potential conflict. They had sparked something far deeper, a collective recognition of the values that united them all. As the applause began to die down, Barron raised a hand for attention. The room fell silent almost immediately, the energy shifting from celebration to anticipation. His voice, steady and deliberate, carried through the gym. "Before we move on," he began, holding both his MAGA hat and the school cap in his hands, "there's one more thing I'd like to say." The students leaned forward, their curiosity palpable. Even those who had initially dismissed him were now fully engaged, drawn in by his authenticity and the gravity of the moment. "This hat," Barron said, lifting the MAGA cap slightly, "represents my beliefs, my family's journey, and the values I hold dear. But this school cap," he continued, raising the navy and gold hat, "represents something just as important. Our unity, our shared experiences, and the community we've built together." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I don't believe we have to choose between the two. We can honor what we stand for as individuals, while also respecting and embracing the values we share as a group." The gymnasium was utterly silent, every eye fixed on Barron. Slowly, he placed the MAGA hat on the podium and adjusted the school cap on his head. Then, reaching into his backpack, he pulled out a stack of identical school caps. "I'd like to donate these to anyone who might need one," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Because no matter what we wear outside these walls, in here, we're all part of the same team." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then, as if on cue, a wave of students began rising from their seats, making their way toward the podium. Some approached hesitantly, unsure of how to respond, while others moved with purpose, their expressions filled with newfound respect. What began as a small trickle soon became a flood, with students from every corner of the gym forming a line to receive a cap. Sarah Chen, known for her outspoken opposition to politically charged symbols, was one of the first to approach. Tears glistened in her eyes as she reached out for a cap. "Barron," she said, her voice trembling, "I judged you before I even knew you. I thought I understood everything about you because of that hat. But today, you've shown me what real leadership looks like." "Thank you," Barron accepted her words with a quiet nod, his humility shining through. "Thank you, Sarah," he said softly. "It means a lot to hear that." Next in line was Marcus Rodriguez, the student body president. He clapped Barron on the shoulder with a grin. "Man," Marcus said, shaking his head, "you just taught us all a lesson in leadership. It's not about proving you're right. It's about bringing people together. Respect." As more students approached, the energy in the gym shifted dramatically. Students who had never spoken to each other before were exchanging smiles, sharing stories, and breaking down barriers that had seemed insurmountable just minutes earlier. Groups that normally sat apart, divided by cliques, interests, or beliefs, were now mingling freely, united by the transformative moment they had just witnessed. In the middle of the crowd, Maria Jimenez, a quiet sophomore who rarely spoke up, stepped forward with tears streaming down her cheeks. "My parents are immigrants," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always felt judged, like I didn't belong. But you showed me that assumptions go both ways. You taught me that understanding is possible, even when it feels so far away. Thank you for that." Barron's eyes softened as he handed her a cap. "Thank you for sharing that, Maria," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Your story matters, and I'm glad we could share this moment together." At the edge of the gym, Principal Daniels watched the scene unfold, his heart swelling with pride. What had started as a simple request to remove a hat had grown into something far greater, a moment of unity that would define the school's culture for years to come. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Barron's shoulder as the last student in line received their cap. "Barron," Daniels said, his voice carrying a mix of admiration and gratitude, "in 30 years of education, I've never seen anything like this. I thought I was preventing a disruption, but you've created the kind of disruption we actually needed, one that brings people together." Barron turned to face him, holding both hats in his hands. "Thank you, sir," he replied, his tone humble yet resolute. "You gave me the chance to speak, and I'm grateful for that. This isn't about me. It's about all of us." As the assembly came to a close, Principal Daniels took to the microphone. "Students and faculty," he announced, his voice steady but emotional. "What we've witnessed today is more than just an inspiring speech. It was a masterclass in character, leadership, and the power of choosing unity over division. Let's honor this moment by carrying its message with us every day." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the gymnasium and into the halls beyond. Students lingered, forming small groups that crossed the usual social boundaries. Conversations flowed freely, laughter broke out spontaneously, and the invisible walls that had divided them seemed to dissolve. As the crowd began to disperse, Barron stood quietly at the podium, watching the impact of his words ripple through the school. He adjusted the school cap on his head, the MAGA hat now tucked safely into his backpack. For Barron, the moment wasn't about choosing one over the other. It was about knowing when each had its place. Walking out of the gym, he passed the school's motto painted on the wall: knowledge, character, unity. Below it, someone had taped a small piece of paper with a new addition. Sometimes the strongest statement is choosing understanding over proving a point. Barron Trump, 2024. Outside, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the schoolyard, where students continued to gather in mixed groups, their usual social barriers noticeably absent. As Barron made his way home, he reflected on the day's events. A moment of potential conflict had transformed into a lasting lesson in empathy and leadership. In his heart, he carried the wisdom his mother had once shared. True leadership isn't about standing in front of people. It's about bringing out the best in them. Today, Barron Trump had done exactly that. Thanks for joining us on Stories That Heal, where small acts make a big difference. Barron Trump's decision to prioritize unity over division is a powerful reminder that we're stronger together. If his story left a mark on you, be sure to comment below, share this video, and subscribe for more transformative stories. Until next time, remember, healing starts with understanding.